All right, guys. This is going to be our first demo in Blender, and we're going to be looking over the interface today and how to work through the first project exercise. So we'll get a little bit of a walkthrough, how to bring in a model into the design space, how to tweak some of the Blender preferences, or at least to see where they are, and important things like how to move a model in space. How to navigate movement in 3D space is a little bit different than what we experience typically with the 2D software we've worked with. So we're going to look at some of those details today. So first off, where I want to start though is inside Blackboard. You should go into the first Blender folder, number 5, for working in the interface. And what you'll want to do from there is I have 2 models linked in there that you can use for practice as far as working with this exercise for practice purposes. So there's one here called the Cyclorama model and one that's called the demonstration scan. The Cyclorama is actually a model that you will use in your scene to create a staging area for your model to rest inside of and to be lit on. The demo model strictly is what it says it is. It's for in-class demos only, so you can use your 3D scan from the Fab Lab in place of that if you like during this exercise, so that you can, hopefully work through the exercise pretty quickly for yourself. But we'll start with those things, so please make sure that you download each of those items and save them to your computer. Each one will come in a zip folder, so you will likely have to unzip each object before you can even use it. So just make sure to navigate to wherever you get those downloaded to and open up the zip for each one so that you have those objects available. All right. A couple things that you'll want to do before we actually get started on working in Blender at this point. I'd like to start off by kind of giving you an idea of a folder structure to play with for creating the project in. It's not all that different from what we've made before this project, but a simple structure will help you keep things in order. So basics, creating like a new folder on the desktop, and you can do that from the drop down for Finder and create a new folder. You can control click anywhere inside the background of your screen and create one on a Mac. Either of those are fine. But you're going to want to make a folder for Project 3. And inside that folder, you're going to need a few others. One of them that's new to this project is one for textures. So I'm just going to create a box for that. And then another one that's good for this project is one for models. So for models that you get from the 3D scanner or like the Cyclorama model that you downloaded, you'll want to put those inside that folder after you've downloaded them. And then some other folders we'll want to have in here, a couple more. One of them will be the in progress. So that's where you keep like your in progress Blender file that you're going to work with, that you're designing in. And then a final folder that would be called output. So there's just 4 basic folders here. Textures, models, an in progress design folder, and one for output where you put all your final, any of your final turn-in files. I would suggest using that for. But that's the basic structure, again, that I recommend working with for this project. Once you've got it designed, you'll want to bring in your 3D models that you downloaded and drop them in the model folder. So just make sure to have like a separate window up if they didn't download to your desktop. And mine went to my downloads folder on this computer, so I'm just navigating to where downloads is located. And I'm going to grab my models and drag those and drop them into my model folder. And now we got those stored in there. And I'm kind of in a good starting place now. All right. The only other thing that I recommend, if you're working inside a campus lab, I do strongly recommend adjusting your mouse to where you can actually do left and right clicking separately. 3-button mouse with a scroll wheel is excellent for use in 3D software in combination with your keyboard. So having those two items available will increase the ability for you to use the interface more efficiently. Otherwise, it'll become a little bit of a drag with shortcuts and stuff. I do recommend, if you have the access to it, like a full-size keyboard is also very handy with 3D software. Again, 3D software leverages a lot of shortcuts that you can use, and an extended number pad on your keyboard can supplement that and works great with that, especially in Blender. It gives us access to a bunch of view adjustment tools that we'll use a lot. Okay. So those are just a couple of my recommendations on the front end. If you don't know how to adjust preferences for your mouse, just go to Applications, System Preferences, and then go to your mouse and make sure that you know, normally when you're in the lab, it's primary button, not very useful. Make sure that your right button is your secondary, which is a pretty typical mouse design. Okay. So just to make sure that's listed there, but make sure it's set up to your liking and your use. All right, I'm going to close that. Close this, and we're going to go ahead and launch Blender from the application bar. So it's this funky orange spindle with the blue dot on it. Pull that up. Right, now when you open it up initially, it'll probably have this little splash screen image with a really cute animal or animated character on it. And that's great. You can just click outside of it to make it disappear. And immediately you get introduced to the Blender interface. So I want to go over some key components for this first exercise, and it's all really about navigating the interface and being able to do basic transformations of an imported object inside the scene. So we're going to work with a couple things here that I want to show you before we jump straight into this crazy interface. I want you to go up to the File menu for Blender, up at the top where it says File, and I want you to go down to where it says User Preferences and click on that. And you'll get a little pop-up window. And this little pop-up window allows you to add and tweak things inside of the Blender interface, again, to your liking and to what you typically do. Now, some of these things you may have no idea about, and that's okay. We're not going to touch everything inside of here. Some things I'll just point out that you may be interested in. So if you go under the tab that says Interface up at the top, click on the one for the interface. And under Interface, there are some checkbox options you may find useful while you're editing inside here. Some of them are things like zoom to mouse position. What that allows you to do in Blender is that if you turn that on, zoom to mouse will literally let you use like the mouse scroll wheel, and it will roll towards wherever your mouse is on screen and zoom into that point. By default, Blender will zoom into the center of the screen only. So if your model is off to the left or the right, or the detail is, you will have to navigate the screen around in order to get to it if you don't want to zoom to your mouse position. Another one that might be useful from time to time is rotate around selection. Again, Blender by default, if you rotate a scene, it will rotate around the center of the screen. But if you have a specific object selected on screen, it will rotate around that object if you have this box selected. And that just allows you to do more fine-tuned editing or viewing of that specific thing in the design environment. And sometimes that's kind of useful. So those are just a couple options that I want to offer to you to maybe think about using. Obviously, they're not required. So that's there, though. If you jump over to Input, the tab for Input, this kind of gives you some options. Over here on the left, there's a long collection of different menus and buttons that you can click on. Some of them are for the mouse specifically. So one of them here is for like emulate a 3-button mouse. So if you have a mouse that has like a middle mouse button, then you can use that. But our mice in here in the lab do not have that feature, so it won't help you necessarily. You can also change your selection method with left or right. By default, it is set for right-clicking to make selections, which might seem kind of odd inside of Blender. So it's kind of up to you. You can use left-click if you want. Instead, that is totally up to you and what you're naturally used to. I would say that probably normally people are used to using left-clicking to make things happen, though. So just be aware that that button is here for you to play with if you want to. Another thing that's good here, this option, this checkbox that says Emulate Number Pad, that's helpful if you're working on a laptop and you want to convert your number keys into the shortcut keys that are for an extended keyboard like we'll use in class. That can be helpful if you're on a laptop. It just simply replaces the shortcuts for the numbers at the top of your keyboard. All right. I'm not going to really play with much else in here. The little arrow boxes next to each of these terms over here on the right, like where it says window, screen, view, 2D, and so on and so forth, these are all your keyboard shortcuts listed under each of these. So in case you're trying to figure out how to do something, they're listed out in different fashion, like based on using the mouse, or sometimes using the keyboard, or sometimes using a trackpad on a laptop. But a bunch of that is listed inside there if there's something assigned for it. And I'll be trying to go over this in class, which features you should use for different parts to help you out. The last one you can look at is called add-ons. And add-ons are literally like, they're like plugins that you can open up into Blender to extend its functionality inside the system. So giving it access to like experimental features, ability to import different file formats, different standard models that you can import that have been generated. There's different things like that in here you can use. If you go to the one that says 3D View from the black kind of menu bar on the side, look for the one that says 3D View along there. Click on that and it'll isolate or filter out all the options based on 3D View plugins you can turn in. There's one here that says 3D Navigation, and so this gives you like a special toolbar for your 3D camera and tool shelf for viewing. Sometimes that can be helpful. If you ever want to turn one of these on, there's a little checkbox over to the far right of the plugin next to this little graphic, sometimes of a character, sometimes a Blender icon, that you can check or uncheck to make that plugin active inside the software. Now I'll go over more of this stuff later down the line to show you other options you can add in. Again, these will not save permanently inside of a lab computer, but if you're working at home, these settings will stay inside of your Blender program. So you can hit that and then hit Save User Settings down at the bottom of this panel to save any changes you've made. And then you can close the window by just closing it out up at the top with the red button for closing it.
Okay, where did you go to save it?
Oh, yeah, there's a little button down here on the
Save.
bottom of the menu.
Okay.
Yep, just click on that once and then close the window. And that'll save your user settings for this round. All right. So I want to give you a runaround of what of the Blender interface and also some of the useful features that we will start out with. So there are going to be a couple things that we'll do from here. First off, one thing that I want you to get familiar with straight off the bat without doing anything else in this system is I want to have the viewports set up correctly for doing fine-tune editing. So we're going to turn on what's called a quad view system inside of Blender. So it's going to take all of your main window and break it into 4 separate grid sections to show an angle of your model from 4 separate views at a time. So to do that, we're going to go down to this lower menu down here where it says View, Select, Add, and Object. This is your 3D menu at the bottom of the screen. And we're going to go to the one that says View. And I want you to slide all the way up on this list that it gives you to where it says Toggle Quad View. You may notice on this same file menu that it also gives you shortcuts for doing that. To the right of the term that or command you're going to use. So toggle quad shortcut is Control-Alt-Q. In my opinion, that's a lot faster to use than going back and forth in this silly menu, but something to think about. So I'm going to turn it on. And this is the immediate change we get is now we've got our system broken down into 4 separate viewing ports. If you notice, inside each port it tells you the name of which view you're looking at in white in the upper left corner of each square section. So this first quad in the upper left is the top view. You may notice the word ortho follows the word top. That means orthographic, basically meaning flat perspective. So it has no vanishing point distortion whenever we're looking at these separate window image views. It's completely flattened perspective or equal perspective. So that's top orthographic. If you go below that, the next grid is front orthographic. That's your lower left. If you go to your upper right, this is called the user perspective window. This is a custom window that you can change the viewing angle on, which we'll learn about in a minute. Typically it's in perspective angle, so it has angular distortion visible inside of it. And then the last view at the bottom right is the right orthographic, or a side. Typically it's known for a side view. And that's what we're seeing going on inside of each of these windows as far as working with viewing options. Some of the other things that you'll notice inside of each window to kind of give you an idea of the different sort of display items. In the lower left corner of each box, you should see 2 little colored lines inside of each box, and they're probably all a little different. But in top, you've got a line that's green and red, and those dictate the two axes that you're viewing. So X and Y is what we see in this screen for green and red. If we go to front, we can see the Z-axis, which is blue. That's basically up and down inside of 3D space is what the blue line represents. And then we have the red line next to it. And then over here in right, we've got the Z and the Y. So it's just showing a side view. And then in the perspective one, we can see all 3 together because it's trying to give you an idea of what it looks like at an angle inside the perspective environment. Okay. You may also notice that it gives you the title of the cube that we have selected in our scene. If you have your cube active, it'll say cube 1 or something like that, or 1 cube. That just tells you which object is currently highlighted in your design right now. All right. So that gives you kind of an idea of what you're seeing through those. If you look in the user window, you may also notice there's this funky grid plane that sort of has your cube resting on or inside of. That is considered the center of 3D space inside of Blender. It's also considered what they call the floor. So this is considered a grid floor. So you can think of that literally as the ground plane for your designing area. You want to keep that thing in view when possible, so you do not get lost in 3D dimensional space land. 3D space is infinite. Let me just throw that out there. So there are no edges, there are no limits to how far you can scroll your mouse inside of 3D space. So if you suddenly find yourself lost, that's probably why. And there are ways to get back to recenter your view or whatever, but that's just something to keep up with on that part. Okay. But that's what you're seeing inside of the 3D space. Some other standard shapes you might see inside the 3D space when you open a new file. You might see some of these black objects in your scene. The one that looks like a dotted circle is your light source. This is just a standard area light that they add to your scene for lighting. And then there's this sort of funky triangular pyramid-like shape. That's your 3D camera, is what that is. And that's used for rendering scenes and stuff. And we'll talk more about that one later. All right. But that, I just want to give you a little bit of a heads up of what you're seeing inside of the scene before we start messing with stuff. So let's start taking a look at some of the tools that we can use for manipulating form inside of Blender. So I want to talk about this in terms of doing what's called transformations. So the first panel we're going to look at, our collection of panels, is over here on the left side of the screen. And these panels are listed in a vertical strip with tabs. We're only going to look at 2 of these. Let me just throw that out there. Tools and the Create tab are the only 2 we're going to look at on this particular panel. You may notice in Blender, if you hover your mouse over a specific button long enough, Blender will give you a tool tip or hint about what that tool is or what it does. It may also list the shortcut over the top of it if you leave it hovering over an item long enough. But the first spot I want to start on is in the tab that says Tools, and I want to look at this little region in Tools called Transform. The first tools under Transform, these first 3 we're going to look at: Translate, Rotate, and Scale. These are the 3 basic tools for doing all manipulation of an object inside of 3D space. The first one is called Translate. Translate is just a fancy word for move. Let me just put that out there. It's just move. Another word you may find commonly used in Blender for move or translate is grab. Grab with a G. That's part of the reason why the shortcut for translate is G on your keyboard, which is for the term grab. But if I click on the translate button, and you can go and do this too, if you click on it and then move your mouse, your object will automatically move around. And it's going to be locked to a 2-angle axis when you do that. And so I can tell that mine's moving based on my front orthographic view because of the way it rotates on screen. So that's how you can make something rotate in a basic way in here. Now, this is not the end all. I'm going to talk about some other ways to actually work with the transformation tools, but these are your kind of simple basics to introduce you to them. So that's translate. If you click your mouse again, it will disengage the tool and release the object. If we go to rotate instead, and then move your mouse or spin it, you'll notice that you can make your object rotate. Now I think that most of these are operating off of the front orthographic viewport, so if you move your mouse around the front ortho view, you'll notice differences of movement. Funny things you'll notice too is that you can move your mouse across the screen and it will recycle across the screen, which is kind of wild looking. That way you can kind of continuously rotate. But when you're doing rotating, it's kind of tricky. Like, it really just depends on where your mouse is positioned before you hit that button. But when you're done with it, you can just click the mouse to disengage the tool again. And then last one is scale. This should speak for itself. When you click on scale, you should be able to move in or away from the object in a diagonal fashion to make it scale up evenly or scale down evenly. Usually when you're doing these, it's either using front or top orthographic view, so you may have to make sure that your mouse is located inside. If you're trying to do movement changes with these buttons, doing it in the top ortho view is more preferable. But again, these are the basics. Like, these are not like primary buttons that you'll play with a lot. In my opinion, they're just kind of like options for simple editing. And that's using your basic transforms just so you can see what they do to the object. Below that, there's a little menu called Edit inside the same tab. And you can see listed under Edit, anything you have selected, you can actually create a duplicate on screen of. There's a button for that. There's also a delete key here. The shortcut for delete is X, by the way. So if you have your mouse over an object in your window, you can hit the X key, and it'll pop up a little window that says, deleting, is it okay? You just click on the word delete, and it gets rid of the object. Now, Command Z still works in this environment for undo. So you can still hit Command Z to go back a step or multiple steps. Another key here to be aware of is this black button that says Set Origin. We're going to use this for repositioning our model, our 3D scan in Blender, because the way that the scan is imported is really weird. It imports it at this incredible oversized shape, and it's located way out in 3D space somewhere. So this will help us center it in the design so that we can work with it more correctly. And I'll show you how to use that in a minute when we get to the import stage. You may also notice below there's another area for history down below. And if you click on the word history, it'll expand it down to reveal your history button. So you can use this like we did in Photoshop, where you can review different steps of what you've done to change the selected object you're working on just by clicking on Undo History. Okay. That's the Tools tab. If we drop down one more tab, let's go to the one called Create. And again, these particular tabs are simplified versions of what your little menu down at the bottom of your screen offers. So you can access a lot of these same options from down below on your 3D menu. These are just more pretty looking. So under the Create menu, you have a section called Add Primitive. So these are basic objects and basic things that you can add into a 3D scene. So the meshes are literally model forms, standard model forms that you can design or add to your scene to design from, manipulate, and transform into new shapes. So let's say we want to add one or two of these shapes to our scene. So I'm going to click on the monkey. I'm going to drop in a monkey. And you can just click on any of these little forms to drop them in. Now bear in mind, if you've changed the shape of your square or your cube on screen, your objects may be appearing on screen but hidden inside of it. So you may need to move your cube out of the way with the Translate tool. Like mine is kind of overlapped on my monkey, and that's okay. But you can add shapes and other standard forms to your scene from here. There's different sections for different types of models and forms you can add. So meshes are your objects. Curves are actually like vectors, like we can create like in Illustrator. So you can actually use curve forms to define 3D structures from, which is really cool. So you can create a lot of custom shapes and forms with those. Lamps are literally your light sources. So you can add multiple light sources from the lamp menu, and there's lots of different kinds. And then the other menu is just that. These are kind of a random smattering of items. Not all of these have visible features on the other menu. But they do have one for adding like text into your design if you want to play off of text, or 3D text and form can sometimes be fun to play off of. Okay. So that gives you just kind of an idea of what you can find under the Create menu in terms of base shapes that you may want to add to your scene to work with at any point. All right. Now from here, some of the other features that I would like to talk about in terms of working with your scene, manipulating objects inside of Blender. I want to talk a little bit more with how to move objects around inside your scene. Besides those buttons that I showed you, there are some better ways to do it on screen or to use shortcuts. So here are some of those. First off, in terms of shortcut options, here are ones for grab, rotate, and scale. So grab is G, and if you have your mouse positioned in a specific window, Blender is sensitive to the location of your mouse, by the way. But I'm going to have my mouse over my perspective window, and I'm going to hit G while it's over that particular window. And when I do that, it allows me to grab and move the object based on the 2D axis of that viewport only. So I can get my object to kind of hover around in a very flat sort of movement, as though it's moving along one plane.
I'm not catching it.
Okay, so if you don't have the object selected, by the way, if you didn't change your mouse options, you may have to right-click on the object to select it.
Okay.
And then you can hit G to hit grab and move it. Now remember, when you're done moving it to where you want it, just click the mouse to drop the object in place, and it'll release it on screen. And again, Blender is sensitive to the viewport you're in when you're using these shortcuts. So if I move my mouse to the top view instead and hit G, now it rotates the object or moves it according to the axis of that specific screen. Okay, so I can rotate it around like this for the top view, which moves it completely differently inside of my perspective view. All right, so that's grab. To rotate an object, you can use the shortcut R. So put your mouse over one screen and hit R once, tap it, and you can rotate the object inside that viewport or according to the axis of that viewport. And when you're done, you can click your mouse to release the object to leave it in a specific rotated position. The cool thing with R when you're rotating is that it actually has two functions you can access. If you hit R once, it'll rotate it on a single axis. If you hit R again, it will convert your arrow into a red and green arrow and allow you to free rotate the object so that you can sort of free spin it in space however you want. Again, it will do it according to whatever port or viewport your mouse was over when you activated the shortcut key. And again, to disengage, just click the mouse to let it go. All right, so that's rotate. Okay, everybody see that? Okay, now let's go to scale. These are all pretty, like the shortcuts, they try to make them connect. So scale is S, S for scale, right? R for rotate, G for grab. So click S, and when you release it, you can move your mouse to drag up or drag in the scale of your object. Bear in mind, if you cross the threshold of your object, its little center point that your mouse moves towards with the connected dotted line, it will invert the object and flip it upside down and mirror it in the opposite direction. So as I go this way, the monkey faces upwards in the top view. But if I push my mouse over this little orange center point, the monkey suddenly flips over and is upside down. See that? And that's because I crossed the center threshold or the center point of the model for scaling. But it does it evenly. This is even scaling when you use the shortcut. When you're done, again, just click the mouse to release the object. All right. Those shortcuts are huge. I highly recommend that you get used to learning those on your keyboard so that you can easily scale, turn on scale, rotate, or grab anytime to do fine-tune adjustments of movement or rescaling of an object. Okay, so that does that. Now, another way that you can access some of the other rotate tools for an object is the on-screen, what's called the on-screen widget. Kind of a funny name, but the on-screen widget for your model is what you see popping out of the center of it, which is that red, green, and blue arrow system. That's the triple axis of the model. And what the cool thing about that is that you can actually use that to control your model. So for instance, if I'm in my user perspective window, and I hover over my object that's selected with this little triple axis widget showing, I can click on any and drag on any of the arrows that are represented on that object or that axis to drag it along that specific axis. So if I click on the blue arrow, it will constrain movement to the Z axis. If I click and drag on the green arrow, it will constrain it to that axis for Y, and then the same for the red, which is X. And I can drag it straight along those. Now, another cool feature about the widget, if you see the little white circle in the center of all three of those lines, you can click and drag inside the tiny little white circle between your three little widget lines to free drag the form in space. And again, that's just clicking inside this little white circle in the center of the widget. And that's, again, another helpful way to understand how to work with the model on screen as you go around. And of course, notice that as you move it in one view, it moves in of the appropriate method in the other three views. So always pay attention to that when you're doing editing or working with a model, that you are working with it in 3D space, much like we would with a baseball. If we were spinning it around in our hands, it changes what we're doing with it on all sides. Okay, so that's using the widget in the basic move or translate form. We can change how our widget works. We can access, rotate, and scale with it as well. To do that, go down to your lower 3D menu and look to where the actual little 3D widget icon is. It's the little red, green, and blue line icon down here towards the bottom of your screen. And it should be right next to some little blue icons, one that's a blue arrow, a blue arc, and a little blue line that connects to a blue square. So those three little blue buttons allow you to change the widget from grab, which is the arrow, to rotate, which is the arc. So go ahead and click on the little blue arc, and your widget will transform into a sphere type rotation system that you can use on your object. And now if you click and drag on one of those colored lines, it will adjust rotation of your model based on those axes.
How do you deselect an object? Again?
If you want to work with a different one, or
Yes.
yeah, if you want to go to a different object, depending on how your mouse is rigged, by standard, right-clicking on another object in the scene is normal. But if it's not working, you may have to use left-click to click on another object. If that's not working, then you need to make sure that your mouse was changed either in Preferences in Blender or inside your computer. On my computer, I have it set to where right-clicking works on my mouse inside my Mac. So that helps me to be able to right-click on items. What that also means is under my user preferences for input, my select with right-click is also turned on. But again, if you don't have right-click active in the computer, then right-clicking selection will never work. So you may just want to make sure that you have a primary button and a secondary button.
So do I need to turn the right button?
Yeah, your right button should be
as the
secondary.
primary?
Oh no, it should be secondary. And then you have a primary on the other side, right?
Yeah, primary, secondary.
Okay, go to Blender Preferences instead. And just double check your user preferences. Go to File, and from the top menu,
Okay.
and go to User Preferences, and go up to Input from the top menu tabs.
See, it's on right.
It's on right.
Yeah.
Then it may be something to do with the mouse. Like
Okay.
your mouse might be on the fritz. Change it to left if you want to in that menu, and see if that helps. Save this. Yeah, save the setting. Close it.
Okay, there it is.
Yeah. It could have just been a glitch. So,
Okay,
but yeah, there you go. So that way you can actually click between different objects.
thank you.
You can also notice when an object is selected, obviously the widget form will appear over the top of that object, respectively. Blender will also reveal selected forms with an orange outline around the perimeter. And you should be aware of that particular feature inside the system. Okay, so that's rotate widget. The last widget is scale, which is this little blue line that connects to a square icon. And when you turn on the scale widget, scale shows just three little lines extending out of your object, but they have squares at the end of each of the lines. And so the cool thing is that you can constrain your scaling options to stretch only in specific directions if you grab the individual colored boxes. Of course, if you click and drag inside the little white circle, that will scale the object evenly instead. I want to add a quick note that I just remembered off the top of my head. When using the shortcut for scale, when you do that, the location of your mouse compared to the location of the on-screen widget matters. For instance, if my mouse is like right here next to where my widget is over my model and I hit the S key for scale, it draws the little line that goes out to my object. The problem I get is that the closer I push my mouse to that center point, it gets really jittery and less controllable to shrink my object down. Sometimes it is better if you're trying to scale an object down to start with your mouse further away from that widget point and then click the shortcut to drag it in more smoothly. That's just a little hint, okay? Because you may experience kind of insanity if you do it the other way. All right, so I'm just gonna leave that there. Okay. So those are some ways to also operate controls over your object. Those are the basics for understanding how to do transformations. So you want to get those nailed so that you know how to manipulate, move objects, and reposition them in space whenever you need to. So get familiar with those shortcuts. And I would even suggest between the shortcuts and working with the widget, that's really all you need to know for moving it around. You'll get pretty far with that. You might even get pretty far with just using the widget, to be honest with you. Okay, so that's just to help you identify some of the tools for moving and transforming the object on screen. Here are some things that I recommend for adjusting your viewports or rotating the camera or the view of your scene. So for instance, if you have your mouse over the user perspective quad, go ahead and move it over that. And I want you to use your extended number pad on the far right of your keyboard. And I want you to look at some of the keys on there because there's shortcuts on here that are going to be really helpful to move, rotate, orbit, and pan your scene around, okay? So here are basic orbit buttons. To orbit your scene around left and right, you can use 4 or 6. 4, if you click on it and push on it several times or click and hold, it will orbit your camera around towards the right or towards the left. And then if you use 6, it'll spin it the opposite direction. And that's what 4 and 6 will do. Kind of little incremental rotations of your screen from your perspective window. You cannot use 4 or 6 inside of the top, front, or right orthographic views. Let me just help you be aware of that. If you have your mouse hovering over top, it will not rotate the top view. It only rotates the perspective window angle. Okay? If you use 8 or 2, 8 or 2 will allow you to rotate up and down around it. And again, if you didn't change any of your user preferences for how it rotates the scene, it will just rotate around the center of your screen for the user perspective window. And that's what mine's doing right now. So that's using those keys to do that. If you use the number 5, will allow you to switch from a perspective distortion view for your user window or an orthographic flat imagery angle. So look at that perspective plane, my grid plane now in my perspective window. Very kind of even looking, but if I hit 5 again, it stretches and distorts it. In a lot of ways, leaving it in orthographic is much more friendly for modeling with accuracy than it is with the perspective angle, just to be just so you're aware of that. The perspective angle is great if you're simulating reality with that shot for outputting a what's called a render file of a still image of the scene. But otherwise, using it in perspective and using it in orthographic is more useful. And that's what number 5 does on the pad. Plus and minus will allow you to zoom in and out. So you can use plus and minus to zoom in and out of a center of your user perspective window. You can also use plus and minus in your top, front, and orthographic view windows. So if you have your mouse hovering over one of those, you can also zoom in and out. A good nifty shortcut to know how to use is panning. So this is different from orbit. Like orbit rotates the scene. Pan literally just slides the scene up and down or left and right. So for instance, if I'm in my front view here and I want to recenter the monkey on screen without moving it, I just want to move the scene around, I can hold down Shift and then I can rotate my mouse wheel to pan the scene up and down. And so that's holding Shift and rolling the mouse wheel inside of one of those views. You can do this with any viewport, by the way. Doesn't matter. Wherever your mouse is, that's what it's going to adjust. And then you can hold down Control to shift or pan your scene left and right.
Shift, you said shift control?
So Shift makes it do up and down, Shift with the mouse wheel, and then Control does side to side.
Control with the mouse wheel?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Control with the mouse wheel. And then if you end up holding down both of those at the same time and you roll the mouse wheel, it'll do this to your perspective window and spin it, which can be a little disorienting. So just be aware of that in case you go crazy, which I do have students do. So. But this is why it's easy to get lost in 3D space. So if I zoom out, I can even use my mouse wheel, by the way, to zoom out of a screen or into it. If I just roll it on its own, it will zoom in and out automatically by rolling the mouse wheel without hitting any other keys. Now again, it is zooming to the center of the window, okay? So just so you're aware. But look how far I can zoom out, right? Like where'd my scene go? That's why it's so easy to get lost in 3D space. Because if I get that far away and then I decide to pan my scene around, I can be lost. Oh crap, where did my scene go, right? You need to be careful with that. All right. So that's what that'll do to kind of help you out with that part as far as navigating inside these windows. It can get really frustrating in 3D land when you don't know how to do that and you lose track of how to get around your model. So it is imperative that you understand how to navigate the scene around as well as moving the object. That'll make editing much, much smoother in the long run. For any of these options that I've shown you, the main view menu down below gives you access to most of them. So these are shortcuts on your number pad. You also have view alignments, which might be helpful. Like you can align your view to a selected object. So for instance, if you do this number and you accidentally pan off screen, right? It's like, how do I get this view to restore? You can go to view, align view, and view selected, and it'll depend on which viewport I'm in. Hold on, it may not do it for the for the perspective window or the user window. That one's always been the trickiest one. When you get user view kind of skewed. Let's see if it'll do it beyond that window. Yeah, it may not. In the case of that particular viewport, if you have that kind of problem going on, then what you really have to do is probably cancel your quad view, turn that off, and then let's go align view, view selected. There we go. Brings it right back to center. And then I can turn my quad view back on. Okay. So that just gives you a few things to work off of in terms of using view options. Other things to consider that you may see down on that lower menu bar for the 3D menu, I'd like to go over real quick, just a few of these. If you notice down there, of course, we looked at view already. There is one called select. Sometimes select is useful if you want to use a tool for selecting objects on screen besides just mouse clicking. Like if you have lots of objects on screen that you want to grab, like let's say I have several monkey heads, right? And they're all kind of scattered around in 3D space like this. If you want to select multiple ones at a time, there are a few ways you can do it. One of them is using the select tools down at the bottom called circle or border. I'm going to use circle select. And when you turn it on, basically what you do, and it sort of determines which window you were last in when you do this. So my mouse was last in right orthographic when I did an edit to my model, so it appears over there with a circle around my arrow to indicate that the circle select tool is active. But what I can do is click on any of the other respective objects in that scene to select them. Now it just disengaged, which was weird. So let me go back. Circle select. Yeah. So now as I click on neighboring objects in the scene, they turn orange or dark orange. That means that you're actually adding multiple objects to a single selection. And I can see that in my user perspective now. I have my first model selected, which is light orange, and then all the ones after it are dark orange. But it indicates that they're all together. So now if I use like my move tool, like G, by the way, after you use select, you have to cancel the tool before you can do anything else in Blender. So you can just hit escape to turn it off. And then I'm going to use G to grab and move all these models now. And so now they all move together. That can be handy, again, when you're just trying to move everything at one time. There are other ways we can do that, and I'll show you another panel in a second for making selections and adjusting objects. If you look down there on that menu, there's also an add menu. And from add, you also have even more mesh objects that you can add to your scene. Special objects like metaballs are listed down there. Surfaces, curves, and so on. So there's a lot of, sometimes there's fun extras you'll find down here that you won't find in the Create tab on the left of the screen. Under the Object menu, you'll find the Delete button. You can also find other buttons like your basic transform controls are also listed under Object. You can find all kinds of things. Some of these other colorful looking icons that are down here, like this white shaded circle, this is actually a way of changing the way that it shades objects inside of your 3D scene to preview how lighting looks and those kinds of things. So the basic white sphere is just solid shading, so it doesn't really give you a preview of what the lighting looks like in your scene. But if you click on that sphere, the white sphere icon, you can also adjust it to these other viewports like wireframe, which allows you to kind of see the skeleton of your design structure, allows you to see straight through your objects. You can switch that viewport material shader also to material. When you go to material, it actually previews the lighting and shadow system that's currently in operation in your scene. And rendered actually does a full preview of your settings to show kind of a, based on your render settings, it could be a realistic photorealistic preview or not. Which we'll use later for previewing your model. Some of these are not effective though for editing. Rendering, you just look on for a preview and then turn it back off by going back to solid. Solid is by far the easiest to edit in because you can see what's selected on screen and what parts. So that's how you can use that. And I think that's really, as far as working with that part down below, that's really all you need to know about down here that we'll work with for now. The last part that I'll show you, I do want to show you maybe one or two parts of panels over here on the right side of the screen at this time. So let's look at the first big panel on the top right. You may notice the first big panel up here on the right. If you move your mouse over the icon that's in the upper left corner for it, it's called the outliner. And the outliner panel, this you can kind of think of as like a layer panel like you would see in Photoshop or Illustrator. And what this does is this lists in kind of a hierarchy format, which is very standard for 3D modeling, all of the objects and things placed inside of a single scene together. So if I kind of hover over these different orange layered objects in here, you can see everything in my scene is represented here. So I've got my camera, which you can also click on each of these to highlight them inside of your scene or select them. This is an alternative way to select individual items. So Outliner can be really useful for that if you can't click on it directly inside of your scene. Just click on it over here in Outliner. So your camera has like an orange camera icon. Any shapes, physical shapes in your design, we'll use a upside down orange triangle inside of the outliner window. That little triangle actually represents like a polygon image. So all of my mesh structures are represented that way. All my monkeys and my cube structure are listed there. The lamp is also listed with a little light bulb icon. So that's your light source in your scene. Other things you may notice in this window when you look at an object is that each of them probably have like a little plus sign next to them. You can expand by clicking on the little plus next to the name of that layer or object in the outliner. And you can expand down to see its properties or what's attached to it. The very basics, if you expand a mesh object, you'll see below it will be usually like a main white triangle image, and that just indicates that it's a mesh model. If you hit that plus, if there's another one, it'll show you material. That's the colors attached to the object. And if you click that, it might also have a red and white checker box called text or texture. And whether or not there's a texture assigned, it will have a specific name next to it. But that's what that looks like. That's why it looks that way. So it's kind of a tree hierarchy system for keeping track of what's attached to each model as a summary. Another good thing to know about this window, there are 3 little icons next to each layer on the far right. This is your way of controlling the visibility or editing capability of that layer. So the eyeball, by this point in creative software, should be obvious. The eyeball controls visibility, just like it did in Photoshop or Illustrator. So if you turn off or on the eyeball for a respective layer, it will turn that layer temporarily off in terms of editing. So if you need to edit a separate object in your scene and it's easier to see it without having this one on, just turn it off. Another way to do it, you may also notice there are a strip of arrows for each layer. And the white arrow, if you turn that off or on, will control the ability to transform or manipulate that particular object. So for instance, if I wanted to work with this particular monkey right here, and let's just say that I positioned it exactly where I want it and I don't want to change anything now by accident. I can turn off the little white arrow icon under my outliner view. And now if I try to click on the monkey again inside my scene, it won't let me whatsoever. I cannot edit it. I can click around it and grab the other objects, but I cannot click on the monkey. So again, that's really useful when you're done editing a specific object and you don't want to mess with it by accident. Just flip the little arrow icon off or on to adjust that. The little camera, that's there for like final rendering when we output our still image. So I'll talk about that when we're towards the end of the assignment, specifically on that part. So don't worry about that today. But that's what's happening in that specific panel. All right. So that's your outliner. Good one to know how to navigate through and use on a fairly often basis. Another place that you may want to notice, the panel that's directly below that is called Properties, and so it has a little strip of icons to represent it. And in there you'll see like a little orange cube icon. If you click on that little orange cube under Properties, that will open up the specific property information for that object you have selected on screen. So if I select this main monkey head right here, my transform properties that are listed, it will tell me exactly where it sits in locational space. Coordinates, it'll give me the rotation angle of the object separated into X, Y, and Z values, as well as its scale changes. So this is kind of just a quick way to see visually, or numerically, what your model has been changed to. It's also a great way to tell if you've stretched a model by accident. You can see that by knowing that the scale numbers aren't the same. When scale X, Y, and Z are different, then your model is not actually scaled evenly. It's been stretched in some sort of way. Okay, I'm not going to really talk about the rest of the stuff on this particular property window right now, but we'll stop it right there in terms of working with that component. Okay, so that just gives you kind of a brief walkthrough of some of the immediate panels that we're going to work with in this assignment. All right. So let's get down to actually importing models into our scene now and finishing up the exercise. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up my scene. So I'm going to delete all of these excess objects. So again, you can go through and select and hit X with your mouse over the object and then click on the word delete to kind of get rid of them one by one. You can also click on each object inside the outliner panel for all of your mesh objects to delete them from there as well. Is another way to also approach it. But make sure that all those models are cleared out because we need a clean workspace. All right. All you should have left in your scene is probably your light and your standard camera floating around in space. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and start importing our models. So if you haven't downloaded a model yet, your cyclorama, or you don't have your 3D scan loaded up, this would be a good time to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and open mine. So I'm going to go to File from the top menu. And then I'm going to slide down to Import. In 3D software, it's important that you tell it what you're doing. It can't use the open command to import a specific file to your scene. So we go to Import, and this is where it's important to know the format for the file you're going to import, because that's all it's going to look for based on these options that you select next. So I know that I'm going to go ahead and import my model, my scan first. So I know that my 3D scan that I have is an OBJ format. Yours might be an STL. From whatever you got from the Fab Lab. So you pick the respective format from the drop-down list based on what you actually have, okay? So I'm going to grab OBJ wavefront for mine, and I'm going to go navigate to my folder using the navigation structure system in here. You can use the little system bookmarks, or you can use the yellow folder structure that started out here. If it's on a personal drive, it'll be listed under this little side menu under System, and you may see your little thumb drive plugged in. I'm going to go into my models. There's my object. And then I'm going to go up to the upper right where it says Import Object, or OBJ in this case. Yours might say Import STL. And I'm starting with the figure on purpose. Two things might happen, okay? Don't freak out before you freak out. If you do not see your model when you start, it's okay. If you see it immediately, good for you. And it's more important if you can see your scan and see the grid plane that you worked with, the floor inside of 3D space, then you're safe. But if your screen's like mine, what that means is that the original scan was so big that it just doesn't fit on screen correctly, so we have to move the model around to get it in the right place. So the first thing you want to do after you've imported your model is look over in your outliner panel and make sure that your model is actually selected for the next step. So click on the model, and it may have a funky name when you click on it for your scan model. Mine has a weird name. It's polygonal model number 1, triangles, whatever, something. That's what mine says. but select it over there, so it should make the text white. And then after you do that, we're going to go over to the far toolbar over on the left side of the screen, the little tool tab that we have. And I'm going to go down under the edit section, and I'm going to click on that dark button for set origin. And someone's computer reset. And I'm going to go under set origin, and I'm going to click on the option that says geometry to origin. Now, this is something I'm doing because my model was located way off screen in Never Never Land. If you imported your model and it immediately appeared over the floor, then you're safe. But for me, my model was not, which means that my model is probably somewhere else and it's probably huge. So what I'm seeing now that I've moved it is that my model is gigantic. If you started out your viewport and it looks like mine, you're seeing your model from the inside. What we have to do when that happens is we have to shrink the model down to fit inside of our grid plane. So what you're tempted to do when this happens is zoom out and everything looks normal, right? But the fact of the matter is your object is still gigantic. It is way too big to work with in 3D space right now. So what we need to be able to do is shrink it down to where it actually fits on top of our grid plane. So what I'm going to do is use my scale options to change that. I'm going to scale it. You can use any viewport. But what I want you to do is when you find the 3D widget on screen, move your mouse kind of a little bit of a distance away from it in a specific viewport. Hit the S key to activate scale. And then slowly drag your mouse inwards towards that center point, and your object will shrink down. Now, again, a quick way to check your math is look in your perspective view, and if you can't see your grid plane, then you're zoomed too far away. And you may need to zoom in by either using plus or minus or rolling your mouse wheel until you see that grid plane. So I zoomed in, and there's my grid plane. I can see it now underneath my model, and that's really helpful. Now, if you've done the option like I talked about before, if you lose track of where your model is on screen in your user perspective window, you may need to switch off toggle view by hitting Control Option Q, and then go down to the little view menu at the bottom and go up to Align View and View Selected. And that should center your screen back on your object. And then you can turn on the quad back on, Control-Alt-Q, and then adjust your editing from there. But again, oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. I'm not seeing my model in the other three.
Yeah.
So.
You may have to zoom in on those particular views towards that center point. Yeah. So it looks like you're just zoomed out. You can, there it is, yeah. So it's just located away from the scene. We'll change that.
Are you all in it?
So you have to turn off, first thing you have to do to align your view is turn off your quad view system. Yours actually looks aligned.
Oh,
If
it's
you-
because I just zoomed out. I didn't.
Yeah,
I never shrinked it.
yeah. So what you need to do is actually start shrinking your model
Oh,
now.
just shrink it.
Yeah. So just use the S shortcut in one of your windows and keep your mouse a little bit of a distance away from the widget
Okay.
when you click S. So pick a window and work with that one to scale from, and then just push it down. And again, if you can't see your grid plane, your camera, or your light in your scene, then you need to zoom in a lot. But in your user perspective window, I mean, that's where you want to see like where your grid plane is.
Okay.
And again, you want your model to fit on top of the grid. So you may have to scale it down quite a bit. My model, I'm looking at my object properties over here on the right side of the screen. It does tell me that my scale is currently set for X, Y, and Z to 0.004. Now, again, that's for mine because my model was giant when I imported it. Yours, if it imported and it was small, then you're fine. You don't need to pay attention to that number because it's probably different for your individual model. But just be aware of that you may have to scale it down a lot. All right, now that we've scaled it down, we need to align the object to look as though it's standing on top of the grid plane correctly. And we're gonna align it with these other viewports and using rotate and grab to do that once you've scaled it down. So I'm gonna start off in my right orthographic view. And I'm gonna make sure that my model is standing straight up in the right view. So to rotate it, because my model is facing the floor right now, right? He's kind of like fully prostrate onto the floor. And if I want to change that, I need to hit my R key inside of that window to rotate him back up. So I'm just going to swing him to where he's standing straight up and down with the blue line. And then click to deactivate the tool once you've rotated into the position you want from that view. This is also a good time to make sure your model is aligned with the colored line axis on screen. So if your model is not lined up with the colored line axis, then you may want to grab and move your model towards those points. So mine, right now, my model lines up, is centered over the green and the blue line inside of the right view. And that's kind of a starting place for it. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to grab my model and I want it to literally stand on top of the green line in my right view. So I'm going to hit G with my mouse inside the right view and just move my model to where it looks like it's standing right on top of the green line inside of my right orthographic view.
So this has become like really huge in my user perspective?
Your model?
Yes.
Yeah, so you'll probably need to scale it back down again is what that means. So make sure that you use scale to do that. So use, again, use S and slowly drag the model down to get it manageable again. And then you may have to zoom your screen to see where your grid plane is. Because yeah, if you don't see where your 3D lights are or any of that, then your model may not be positioned correctly. And that's the trick of working in 3D space. When you start dragging and moving stuff around, it can be exaggerated movements based on its scale. So if your other 3D windows like aren't zoomed in kind of at the same level, then you may find yourself like moving your object incorrectly. But yeah, like I try to stay tightly zoomed in on my screens as much as I can. But again, align your object with that, with those lines in the right view. In the front view, you should also make sure that your object is aligned with the blue vertical line on that and still standing on top of a red line inside the front view. Your model should also be facing you from the front view. If your model's not facing you in the front view when you've rotated it, like what if it's spun around like this, right? What you need to do, if that's the case, is move your mouse over your top view and then use the R key to rotate in the top view only so that it spins on one axis so that you get the model to face front where it says front. That way you're working more accurately with your sculpture as you go. All right. Now, once you kind of got that model fixed into position, again, if it's still far out, you may want to zoom in on your other views and use those to move things around. Yeah, like on yours,
Oh my goodness.
yeah, use those. What you need to do is reset move the little crisscross lines for your blue and green lines to the center of those little windows so that you can zoom straight into them. So remember, you can hold down Shift or Control and then use your mouse wheel to recenter your respective window. But yeah, try to get that little crisscross thing to be in the center of those little windows. That helps to be able to zoom in directly to the center of them so that you can get an accurate read of your scene when you roll the mouse wheel in and out to zoom in and out. This is the only time where like the checkbox for under user preferences for zoom towards your mouse counts or might be helpful, so that you can actually zoom to wherever your mouse is pointed inside your window. All right. Now once we got the character placed, we're going to drop in the cyclorama. So to grab your cyclorama, and again, you can drop this in. You don't need to move that once you drop it, by the way. The cyclorama is already positioned correctly. It's just a matter of getting your model on it. So I'm going to go back to File, Import. And my cyclorama model is a Collada DAE file. So I'm going to go to that and navigate to wherever my cyclorama was downloaded to. Make sure you unzip the file, of course. Now when you import it, the cyclorama is big on purpose, okay? But a cyclorama is typically dictated as kind of a typical sort of studio stage, sort of smooth backdrop with sort of a 180-degree rounded background for you to work with. But it's meant to be gigantic compared to your grid plane. In a couple words, you don't need to move it, okay? It is technically positioned exactly where it needs to be for the rest of your editing. All you have to do is make sure that your model is inside the cyclorama and not sticking out of it or floating outside of it. So please make sure that your model is smaller than the cyclorama and that it fits inside of its walls. As you can tell, like my little model is pretty tiny inside of mine. It fits on top of my grid plane and it fits inside the cyclorama. And that's really all you're shooting for as far as positioning your model inside your scene. And that's all you're doing with the first exercise, is getting it into that position. And that may mean a lot of work of finagling and moving the model around. So that's the last step we do. After that, we can go ahead and save the file at this point to work with it later for the next exercise. So I'm going to go to File, Save As. And again, I'm going to save it to wherever my model work is. So I'm going to go to Project 3, In Progress. And this will have the longer file name so that I know how to identify it. So I'm putting your name on it with the semester and the project number. And this will save it as a .blend format, so that's Blender's scene format. And then you just hit Save as Blender File over in the upper right. And that's it. Yeah, let me cut off the video right here. So, all right, so that's all that we're going to cover in terms of the first exercise. Again, you can review the video to check up on parts for any techniques or processes. All right.